for Racial Justice, Central Iowa Candidate Forum, and the theme is Thoughts on Racial Justice. So all the questions are going to connect back to racial justice and how to promote that here in Iowa through policy and through what can be done in the State House, since that's where our candidates are aiming at. This event is being recorded, so that recording will be shared afterwards with our membership. I don't think we're going to post it publicly or anything, but I know some folks can't make it, so that's helpful for them. So once again, thanks everyone for being here, and we're gonna have a great conversation. Before we dive in, just a brief word about what SURJ is. Showing Up for Racial Justice is a network of individuals and groups throughout the country. We have chapters, I think there's 30, 50, at least around the country. There's a pin map on our website showing you, but it really is a national movement. Each chapter functions largely independently. Here in Des Moines, the Des Moines chapter was founded in 2016 by a small group of individuals, one of whom, Janae Harvey, I believe, is on the call. And since 2016, DSM SURJ has been focused on education, it's been focused on immigration, it's been focused on civil rights and policy change, it's been focused on the experience of students of color in our public schools, and just a lot that's been going on. The felon enfranchisement that was passed recently. There's just been so much happening, as we all know, in the news about racial justice and how to promote it, and how to fight against things that are holding us back from getting to racial justice. So we've been very busy here at DSM SURJ, and we just doubled our leadership core from 5 to 10 people recently to kind of keep up with all of this work. So we don't have a lot of time on this call to talk more about SURJ, even though I'd like to. So we encourage you to check out dsmsurj.org. Join our Facebook group and follow our page to learn more about what's going on. We also have a bi-weekly newsletter that goes out, and if you want to engage, we certainly want to engage with you and to do this work together, because it takes all of us. So I'll leave it at that for now. But this evening, we're going to try to make this pretty streamlined and painless. First, we'll have candidate introductions. So we'll take turns, 2 minutes each. Just tell us about yourselves and why you're running, who you are, and a little bit about your story. That's always interesting to hear. And then we'll go into questions. So we have 4 questions that have been pre-selected that everyone will answer. And so we will go round robin style, one at a time. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to answer the question, and that will be timed. Amy is off camera, but she has a bell that she's very happy with that she'll be ringing to make sure that everyone knows the time is up, because we do want to make sure everyone gets equal time. I will also be just making a quick reinforcement of that when she rings the bell too. After the 4 questions, we'll go into participant Q&A, which basically means we're calling questions from all sorts of questions that came in when folks registered. So we got a lot of great questions, and those will be shared, and they will appear in the chat though. I will stop sharing my screen. My screen will not be shared at that point. So we're really just gonna have faces on the screen. For the audience members, if questions do come up, or if a candidate says something that you would like to follow up on, feel free to drop that question in the chat, and we will do our best to manage and pass along questions that haven't been addressed yet. Of course, we do have limited time. We certainly won't be able to answer every question that everyone has. So if your question doesn't get answered, just remember that this call tonight is what we hope to be the beginning of a dialogue and not the end. So follow up with that candidate after the event, send them an email, call them, and make sure that we continue the conversation. This is important housekeeping stuff. So mics are muted for all of the audience members on the call. We want to minimize noise. We do ask that people who are not candidates turn their video off so we can keep the focus on the candidates. We can kind of pretend that they're on a stage like you might see on TV. And the format, again, is curated. It's not town hall format. So there's not a time when an audience member will have a microphone to ask a question. But that's what we hope will keep things moving a little bit more smoothly. Each candidate will go first at least one time, so we'll be rotating the question order. And like we said, mind the timekeeper. Chat is open for everyone who has a question that pops up. And we do not tolerate any racist or hate speech at any time. That's obviously a core of what we do here is fight against those things. And we just encourage polite communication at all times and treating everyone as you want to be treated. And again, this is only the beginning of the dialogue. So for anything that isn't covered, please just save that and continue the conversation after the event. Okay, question number 1. And this is where I'm supposed to stop sharing my screen. So let me do that and pop back in. Okay, so this question is going to go to Jennifer Konfrst. And the question is this: Iowa continues to rank among the worst states in the nation for racial disparities in arrests and incarceration. According to Iowa State Data Center, African Americans make up approximately 3.4% of Iowa's overall population, but make up 25.5% of its prison population. What steps, if any, would you take to address these disparities at the state level?
Thank you, Chris. Do you want me to do the introduction part now too, or just hop into the answer?
I'm sorry, I completely bypassed introductions. Let's do that, and then we'll get to the question.
Okay. Well, so you want me to just go right into the question then? Yeah.
Well, please do your introduction, and then we'll do the question. I'm sorry. That's my mistake.
You're fine. Okay. So hi, everyone. I'm Representative Jennifer Konfrst, and I am from Windsor Heights, Clive, and West Des Moines. I live in Windsor Heights, and I represent House District 43, which is just west of the metro. I represent both the Des Moines Public Schools and West Des Moines Schools and Dowling Catholic School. So they're all, I have people who go to all those schools in my district. So families from here have varied backgrounds, different perspectives to bring, and I absolutely love doing this and representing them. I teach at Drake during my day job. I teach journalism and political communication, and I am serving my first term. I'm finishing up my first term for the Iowa legislature this year and hoping to get the chance to go back and make a difference, hopefully in my position, in my opinion, in the majority. So I really have focused my time in the legislature on my work as part of the Judiciary Committee, making sure that we're getting minority impact statements for legislation. I've made sure that any of the legislation that we've done through other committees as well has addressed issues related to social justice and racial justice, and I'm looking forward to talking more about those. I also have thought a lot about these issues with regard to my role as a Crew Scholar mentor at Drake University. We have a program that's designed to help students of color as they are first generation college students as they work their way through the college system, and helping them to bridge that gap and identify issues on campus. And Drake has had its share of issues on campus recently as well. So I'm really grateful for this dialogue, because these are the kinds of issues that I know that our young folks are talking about, and I know that we as a legislature need to talk more about. So I'm grateful to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. We'll go over to Heather Matson.
Should unmute myself. Thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Heather Matson. I represent Iowa House District 38, which is generally speaking the south side of Ankeny, Saylor Township, Crocker Township, the Delaware 1 precinct, and the Des Moines 1 precinct. So a big chunk of unincorporated Polk County, along with part of Ankeny. And I am also serving my first term and running for re-election. I've spent my career working in public policy, advocacy, and development. I also have twins who are in 5th grade at Prairie Trail Elementary. So I've also been a stay-at-home mom to them. So that's kind of my background there. And I think it's also important to mention, I'm glad Jennifer mentioned the variety of the school districts that she represents or has in her district. It's very similar in mine. I have the Ankeny School District and the Sewell School District, which couldn't be more different. And then there are small pockets of folks that also attend Bondurant-Farrar and Southeast Polk. So quite a range there. I'm running for re-election because I think all Iowans deserve economic security and economic opportunity. and we need a legislature that's focused on policies that help all Iowans get ahead. It's been my core belief for as long as I can remember, and I think that's what we need to keep working on. See, I spend most of my time focused on education and healthcare. Those are the two big committees that I serve on. And within education, my focus in the last 2 years, but in the last year especially, has been on equity. And when I talk about that, I really mean funding in particular, both within a school district and across school districts, because there is so much that we need to be talking about. And I know one of the questions that was a possibility for this conversation is about equity of funding. And so I do hope that's something that we get to talk about. And I just look forward to having this really important dialogue, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Heather. And we'll go over now to Aaron Sewell. Aaron.
Thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate you having this forum. We need to have these conversations, as mentioned before, a lot more often in the Capitol building, outside the Capitol building. It's a tough subject, but that's because we don't talk about it enough. You know, we can't be real for each other. We can't learn from our experiences, our perspectives. So my name's Aaron Sewell. I am the Republican candidate for Iowa House District 42, which covers most of Polk County, West Des Moines in Polk County. And my full-time job is teaching 4th grade. I teach in the Ankeny community school districts, and I've spent a lot of time working in school districts across the metro, honestly. I've been down in Martinsdale, I've been in Indianola, I've been to Urbandale, I've been up to Dallas Center Grimes, West Des Moines a lot. So I've seen a lot of different classrooms, a lot of diversity, a lot of students, a lot of just teachers that really love kids and working with kids and the struggles they're going through, and how much education is a backbone of our communities. So I really appreciate this forum focusing on diversity, because with light of what's going on, it's a conversation that's always long overdue. So I'm really excited to be here, really excited to share our thoughts and how we view things, and look forward to engaging with you guys.
Thanks, Aaron. Sorry for mispronouncing your last name. People do it to me, so get someone knows. Next, we'll go over to Dave Stock.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Dave Stock, first-time candidate for the House. So thankfully, I don't have to worry about re-election because it's my first time. But I grew up in Clarion, Iowa, so a very small town. The last decade, before about 3 years ago, I lived in the Cayman Islands. And my entire life actually has been focused on teaching leaders that are in position of power how to manage their teams. Because despite that we've got other teachers here, which actually have my elementary teaching degree as well, adults have a real hard time in treating people fairly. I'm really excited you asked all the candidates to join this forum, because I think it's really important, just like Aaron said, to have the conversations. That's what we don't have. I am an independent. I am running for District 44 for the Iowa House. And the reason that I chose to run as an independent is because I don't want to, with any issues, be beholden to a party, basically. And I think we need more independence in there so that we can have more discussions and less of the finger pointing, I think, on both sides. And like Aaron said, the conversations are what we're not having right now. And that is leading to a lot of angst, I think, on either side. So I'm really looking forward to hearing other people's opinions tonight and listening very intently to what they have to say, and hopefully be able to hear some that I will be a part of come this next year, so that we can continue those conversations in the actual Iowa legislature.
Thanks, Dave. We got a couple candidates that couldn't make it at the last moment. So Bruce Hunter will bring up the rear. So Bruce, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for holding this forum. I think it's an important forum to have, and as been mentioned before, it's good to get the conversation started and get some hopefully fresh ideas out there. As I said, my name is Bruce Hunter, and I'm the House of Representative member for District 34, which represents the kind of the south central part of Des Moines up through the downtown area and a little bit north of the downtown area. I've served in the House now for 18 years, and I'm the ranking member on the Labor Committee. I also serve on the the state government committee, the local government committee, the admin and reg budget committee, which basically takes care of the budget needs for the executive branch, and on the Ways and Means Committee, which deals with taxes and that type of thing. The reason that I'm running again for the House and hopefully bring in a Democratic majority is that I am committed to not only bringing back but enhancing the rights of Iowans here in the state. And when I say that, I mean that the right to have a voice in your job, the right to be able to vote as easily and legally as possible, and the right to live a good, successful life here in Iowa, regardless of your color, the color of your skin, your sex, your sexual orientation, or anything. It should be based on your abilities to do a good job here in Iowa. And I'm committed to making sure that we bring those rights back to where they should be.
Great. Thank you, Bruce. I'll repeat the first question. It will go to Jennifer Konfrst, and we'll get started. So, Iowa continues to rank among the worst states in the nation for racial disparities in arrests and incarceration. According to Iowa State Data Center, African Americans make up approximately 3.4% of Iowa's overall population, but make up 25.5% of its prison population. What steps, if any, would you take to address these disparities at the state level? Question to Jennifer.
Great, thank you. Well, I think first of all, big picture, I would love to remove the profit motive from the incarceration model so that we're not looking for people to enter prisons, but we're actually trying to keep people out of prisons. And I also want to address sentencing guidelines for nonviolent crimes. And that is a big picture issue that I think both of those need to address. On the sort of more immediate scale, I think that we need to require law enforcement to track arrests, stops, complaints, uses of force, and then use that data to identify industry trends so that we're not just taking everybody's word for it, right? We're getting some systemic data that we can use to truly see where the problem is and try to stop it at the arrest level. Going back even farther, I think that we need to address discipline in schools. You know, I have concerns that our schools are using discipline as a nice opening door to the school to prison pipeline. And I feel like we need to be addressing the issues of school discipline in a different and more collaborative and community driven way at that school level. I'm not, necessarily saying that means do or don't get rid of school resource officers, but I think that our focus needs to be more on treating kids as kids and less as getting them disciplined and sent off. So I'm concerned about that. That does relate and correlate to racial disparities that then lead to that school to prison pipeline. So finally, I just think we need to enhance community policing, community dialogue. When people live in communities, when people know the communities that they serve, they can work better together. And so finally, I think that would be another thing that can serve and benefit in a lot of ways. And one of them would be to hopefully reduce the number of people in prison altogether, but also reduce that racial disparity.
Thank you. Question to Heather.
Thank you. It's a great question and a really important one. And certainly the disparity is really troubling, and it's definitely a problem. And I don't want to just repeat everything that Jennifer just said, but I will echo those comments. I think we are very much in line there. And I would actually just want to paraphrase Senator Cory Booker. One thing that I've heard him say repeatedly is that you are more likely to go to jail if you are poor and innocent than if you are rich and guilty. And that's just something that we really need to be thinking about when it comes to sentencing and so many other pieces. One thing that I would really like to see addressed is our cash bail system. I don't think it's working in the way that it should, and I really think we need to address it and the role of cash bail as a whole and whether or not it's a good idea. I think we also need to be providing more funding to public defenders because they have tremendous caseloads, right? And regardless of, if you think of just like anyone's job, right? The more that you have to deal with, the harder it is to pay individual attention to each of the pieces. And so when you think of public defenders having way too many clients, it is really hard for them to be the best possible advocates, even if they are the best possible public defenders, right? For them to have that time for each of their clients. So if we can invest more from the state level and public defenders, then hopefully that can also help. And just kind of going back to one of the things that Jennifer said too, we need to consider how young people of color are often treated differently in educational settings, because we know that there is a school to prison pipeline, and whether it's intentional or not, it's still happening. So the fact that we need to address it, or the fact that it is happening, is a reason to address it.
Thank you. Question to Aaron.
Yeah, something that can be done immediately across our communities and at the state level is looking at what things we're imprisoning people for. And a lot of things that's really simple to point to is how are we regulating the marijuana industry, for one. It's highly scrutinized, where we're arresting young people and putting them in jail for this substance, and then we have plenty of legal substances that hurt and damage lives every day. I once was a mentor when I was getting my second degree through Iowa State, and one of my students was killed by a drunk driver. And there's tons of stories of people having too much, going over the limit, and hurting themselves or hurting other people's lives. And it's not even nearly closely scrutinized as drugs like marijuana. It's frustrating to see that, and that something that doesn't have the same effect or harm as many of these other things we're not closely looking at, and we're throwing in these low-income minority people for it. Other things we can do is that has been getting done lately by the legislature is continue to look at policing practices across the state in our communities. What are the hiring practices? A West Des Moines officer told me that they can have all the best review processes and policies in the world when it comes to hiring, but if they can't fix the heart of the people they hire. So it's also something else that we have to look for, is the integrity of the people serving in our communities. What is their intention? Why do they want it's a lot of power. It's a lot of risk and endangerment they go into their jobs each day, but there are people who are given a lot of power in these situations that it's really difficult to find these people, but it's something we need to, as a community, support the good, but also we need to be like, hey, we need your help too, because there are bad officers out here throwing people in jail with profiling or traffic stops, and it's filling up our prisons. So it's something we need to look at. It's something we need to continue studying. We need our officers to engage with our communities, to understand our communities, because it's easy to drive through and look for trouble. But if you don't understand the people there, why we're there, what's going on, then we're not treated the same. Minorities and low-income people are not treated the same, with just more statistics to go onto a list.
Thank you. Question to Dave.
Yeah, excellent. I would feel like a broken record repeating anything Jennifer, Heather, or Aaron just said, but I want to cover a couple of the things and really echo a few of those as well. The first thing is, I'm a big data person. I love data. Unfortunately, data can also be skewed, whichever side of the equation you want to see it on. So what Aaron said is right. What are they going for? Figure out what they're going for. When I was looking in answering this question for the group, it was 70% were going to jail for robbery. So you say, well, that's bad. Robbery is bad, right? Well, why? Why are they going for robbery? Why is that? So identifying what they're going for, identifying why. So what is that root cause? And then what can we do as a group to actually help them address those root cause issues? And I would suspect that a lot of it may be economic. It may be racial profiling. I like what Aaron said as well. I'm a huge believer that police are vitally important, but I think they're even more important if they're a part of that community. I cannot imagine being a police officer and living in the Waukee, Clive area and having to police, whichever side of Des Moines that I don't live on, because I would not understand that community. And moreover, the community wouldn't understand me. I grew up, like I said, in a very small town, and I guarantee you that all the police officers knew who I was and knew what I did, and just like they did every other high schooler. And so they can better address those issues because they know the cultural background. It came up in a later question as well with the teaching. Again, I would be a big proponent of teachers having to live within the where they're working. It's just got to be that way for community activities, whether it's policing or whether it be teaching. So I think knowing the community, figuring out what is going on with the data, figuring out why that's happening, and figuring out what the root cause is really a simple but very hard task to do. So I would be very curious to make sure that we all dig into the data a little bit further instead of jumping to conclusions one way or the other. And I think community policing, where policemen live in the community, because let's be honest, they have a thankless job. They need to be able to know their community to police it effectively.
Thank you. Question to Bruce.
Thank you. Two things that I have proposed in the past and will continue to push in future legislations, and I think we have a good chance of making it happen this coming year, is number one, the decriminalization of marijuana. Right now, blacks and whites use marijuana at roughly the same rate. However, blacks are 7 times more likely to be put in prison than whites are for using marijuana. My proposal would be to make using marijuana a civil crime with a small fine. That, I believe, would take care of a big problem. The other bill that I have sponsored in the past and will continue to sponsor is the use of racial profiling. In pretextual stops, again, whites and blacks are stopped at about the same rate. However, blacks are 3 times more likely to have their car searched, to be pulled out of their car, and that's just not right. My bill would, number one, explicitly eliminate racial profiling for every law enforcement agency in the state of Iowa. But over and above that, it would set up an outside task force in each community, of a task force of not only some police officers, but mainly city leaders and citizens of each city that those police or law enforcement deal with, and set up rules and enforcement on racial profiling. That outside group would set up what is and what isn't racial profiling instead of the police department setting it up. That outside group would be charged with enforcing and establishing did racial profiling happen, and what would be the penalty for racial profiling. I was in a forum with the Des Moines Police Department early last year. And at the time, I believe it was May, they had a total of 5 racial profiling incidents. I find that appalling. I had more than 5 racial profiling complaints walking into that forum from people than the police department said that they had altogether. And that's because I think the police is investigating themselves and will bend over backwards to say that they aren't racial profiling. I heard a bell.
Thank you. That is time. Okay, so we'll go to question number 2. This one will start with Heather. The question is, Governor Reynolds recently signed an executive order to restore voting rights to felons who had served their time. Do you support writing a bill to make this a permanent change? And what changes would you propose, if any, to what Governor Reynolds signed already? Question to Heather.
Thanks. Really important question. Voting rights is something that I'm particularly passionate about and have spoken on the House floor about over the last 2 years. And I guess I think of this like in 2 ways, or 2 pieces. One, I am glad that an executive order finally happened. There are many of us that have been asking and pushing for one for a very long time. So I'm grateful that it finally moved. I'm frustrated that it wasn't for everybody. So I think it's really important that when we talk about restoring voting rights, it is to anyone who has completed their sentence, right? It shouldn't be a caveat of for certain crimes, right? Like you have done your time, you get your voting rights back. It is one of the most important rights that we have as Iowans and as Americans. So that's kind of one piece of it. I absolutely support a constitutional amendment. I voted for it. I will vote for it again. I am deeply frustrated, angry. I have a lot of feelings and thoughts on the fact that the Senate refused to take it up after we passed it out of the House. And now it needs to start, the process has to start back all over again. And that is just, it's fundamentally unfair for too many Iowans. One thing that I do want to mention too, there was that really terrible bill this past session that essentially is a poll tax for Iowans who, are formerly incarcerated felons to have to repay restitution before they can get their voting rights back. I think it's important to remember that no matter what, you are required to pay restitution, right? That requirement does not go away. But I think it's fundamentally unfair to tie your right to vote, one of the most important rights we have as Americans, to your ability to pay restitution, because it's fundamentally unfair. And we also know that it is really hard when you get out of prison to be able to get a job and to do so many other things in order to make the money to pay it back. So that's kind of where I stand on that. And I would also just add, I think this matters, and part of why voting rights matters so much is that if you're a voter, you are that much more connected to your community, right? You have a stake in what's happening in it. And I think if we want to make sure that, that we're lowering recidivism rates, then that's another reason to make sure people are voting, because that's just one more connection that they have to their community.
Thank you. Question to Aaron.
I'm going to preempt this by reminding people that I'm a Republican candidate. And I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back at all. I'm saying that to help explain my frustration when I see things happen on Capitol Hill and I don't understand the reason behind it, because people are elected. I hope to be elected. And the reason we're elected is to serve people, to serve all people. We want people to engage in government. We want as many people as we can to be involved in their government. And when we pass certain legislation that seems to create second-class citizens by holding back their right to vote, or fail to pass legislation that allows them to have their permanent right to vote, it creates that second class of citizens, and it looks like we're afraid of the people we're representing. Doesn't matter if we agree with them, doesn't matter if they agree with us. It's our job to understand their perspectives. It's our job to explain our perspectives and then work it out from there. But oftentimes it seems like there seems to be a power grab between officials, and it can be really frustrating at times. It's like, we gotta remember why we're there, why we're here. So I'm in favor of returning rights permanently to people who have completed their prison sentence. They've done their time. We let them back out because we felt that's what they owed to society. So holding back that right to vote, it's like I had mentioned in my mini rant, it's creating that second level of people, second class of citizens saying, well, you're back out in the world, but you can't participate in all activities yet. Even though we let you out of jail, we're still going to hold you in a different sort of jail and hold back that right. So yeah, I'm completely in favor of supporting legislation, sponsoring legislation that pushes it to be a permanent right for those people that qualify, that did their time, that are back out in the community. And I said, if I'm blessed enough to be on Capitol Hill, I'll definitely be fighting for it and making noise, whatever it helps get those Iowans their rights back.
Thank you. Question to Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if someone has done their prison time, I can't think of any reason why their voting rights would not be restored. The one thing that I had said in my answer is I'm less in favor of an individual deciding that, such as a governor, no matter who that would be. I'm more in favor, again, as a data person, I'm more in favor of using artificial intelligence, frankly, to automatically restore those rights. And that should be pretty simple. You know, when somebody's released from prison, typically means they've done their time. When they're released from probation, they finish their sentence, maybe if they have probation after they leave jail, and using AI to do that so that it doesn't have to be much like Aaron just said, you know, kind of like oh, please restore my voting rights because I wasn't quite a full citizen and now I am. Let artificial intelligence, and we can do that, it's not that hard, help restore those voting rights to people that have served their time. If you've served your time, you should be able to become a productive member of this society, and a large part of that includes voting. And voting because your voice matters. Even if you've been a convicted felon, you've been released, your voice still matters. And I think if we do that, we actually change people's outlook on maybe how they think society views them.
Thank you. Question to Bruce.
Thank you. I do applaud Governor Reynolds for doing the executive order to restore voting rights. We've got to remember, though, we restored the voting rights that her boss took away 10 years ago. And if we leave things the way they are, it could be that the next governor that we have will decide to take away those rights again. One thing that I do have a problem with the executive order that the governor did file, she made a big deal out of that there wasn't any kind of reparations, that you didn't have to repay your fines or anything before you had your rights restored. That's not exactly true. One of the big items that many times gets put on either probation or parole is the requirement that you pay back all restitutions before your parole or probation ends. So if that doesn't happen, in many cases, your parole won't end or your probation, and you won't have those rights restored. What I would be in favor of, right now in the Constitution, it says that anybody that commits an infamous crime will have their voting rights taken away. We have not really ever defined what infamous crime is, either in the Constitution or in code. What I would like to see happen is that in the Constitution, put through a constitutional amendment that defines infamous crimes as voter fraud. That's what you get your voting rights taken away from. Everybody else can still vote. And that also means being able to vote while you're in prison. Our prison system is supposed to be a rehabilitation center. One way to fully rehabilitate people is to make them part of society. And voting is one great way to do that. So I would define infamous crimes in the Constitution and go through it that way to make it permanent so that the next governor can't take away those rights.
Thank you. Question to Jennifer.
Thank you. The first bill I ever signed on to was the one Representative Hunter just talked about. It was the bill to define infamous crimes as voting related crimes so that others would be, so that we would have a definition in the Constitution. Yes, I support making it permanent, the enfranchisement of felons who have completed their sentences, and I do not believe that they need to have paid their reparation or their fines before they get that right back. If they've completed their sentence, if the state has decided they no longer need to be incarcerated, then they're full citizens and should be able to participate fully. And so I believe we need to make it permanent so it's not at the whim of the governor. And I do believe, I do not believe in continuing to restrict that right based on the crime that they commit. I mean, the bill that I did before with Bruce was regarded to infamous crime for voting rights, but I think that the most important thing is that if you've completed your sentence, you should be able to participate fully in citizenship, and that includes voting. So that is where I am. I don't know what I can say other than what everybody else has said. I don't want to be too repetitive. So yeah.
Thank you. Question number 3. This one will start with Aaron. And the question is, Latinx students are a growing population in Iowa public schools. They were only 3.6% in the school year 2000-2001 and increased to 11.1% by the 2018-2019 school year. Yet their unique needs and issues are not being addressed by school districts and the Iowa Department of Ed. What changes or policies would you pursue, if any, to address the specific needs of Latinx students and their Spanish-speaking parents? And the question is to Aaron.
Yeah, thank you. I have spent a lot of time working before I got my job in full-time in Ankeny, working in the West Des Moines community schools. And mainly West Ridge Western Hills and Crestview School of Inquiry, where there is, and especially Crestview School of Inquiry, there's a really high level of immigrant students and families. And I spent my last days of student teaching there, 8 weeks. And in the classroom itself, there was a lot of Latinx students, and it was one of the most enjoyable things I ever got to do, was working with those kids and trying to help them get the skills they needed. Something we do too much as a society is pushing benchmarks and standards and trying to get our students to be the same as or better as other states or other countries. When they're such individual learners and have these individual needs, we forget to provide them the resources they need as individuals. I spent some time talking with administrator in West Des Moines schools on what are the challenges facing West Des Moines School District. And she had mentioned that it's a lot of it is having a fully funded resource programs that can address the needs of readers, of students who are English language learners. So that's something that, as members in the state legislature, we need to look at. There has been a lot of investment going on, but there's plenty of opportunities to invest more, to invest directly in the classroom. What are districts doing? Are they investing directly into their student classrooms? How can we as a state better create formulas? I believe that's another question coming up. Formulas to provide funding for classrooms and equity. And then, how can we as leaders be in communication with our teachers and understand what they're struggling with and what these families are struggling with, and how can we provide them the tools, the resources, and the support to do their jobs and to teach these students that are coming to them. So providing resources for these English language learners to be a part of their schools, a part of their communities, and just being there for them. It's going to take investment. It's going to take financial investment. It's going to take other investment. So we need to continue striving for that and providing equity.
Thank you. Question to Dave.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that's a good segue into a lot of things, which are going to boil down basically to funding and access. If you're looking at someone where English is their second language, again, I go back to the police example that I gave. You need to have people that understand that culture. I think there were 2 or 3 former teachers, Aaron's one now, I believe. So you cannot expect a teacher that's in an elementary classroom that's got, let's say, 25 students to individualize learning for 25 different kids and have, call it half those kids where English is not their first language. That is an impossible job for a teacher. So when I said funding and access, I think funding is important because there is technology now that would help those learners. I think it's super important that we teach kids that English is their second language. We teach them in their native tongue, but that they also learn English so that they become more integrated with society and can function at a higher level with the majority of people who speak English. I think that's always been the case, frankly, in the US. And oftentimes it's the kids who bridge that gap with the adults, because adults, we're all adults. I think when I look on the screens here, we have a little bit harder time learning new languages, kids not so much. So they bridge that gap. I think the other thing that goes along with that is having teachers, again, that are in that community so they can understand the cultural background of the students and where they're coming from. And if you're living in that community, you can, even if you're speaking with someone where maybe English is not their first language, you have a trust. And I said this in a couple of my answers, a trust that you can build up with the community so that they know that you are doing your best to help their child. And again, I would like to see technology more utilized in classrooms because we can only throw so many people at the problem. At some point, you have to say there's not enough people in the world, there's not enough money in the world. What technology can we utilize? And again, there's lots of technology out there that would help that learner on an individual basis and then help that teacher on an individual basis as well if the English language is a barrier. But I think, again, it's that community involvement. And that's, as a society, what we're missing, I think, with all of these issues. We have everybody on both sides trying to get their battle in, but what are we doing in our individual communities to make that better? And I hope that's what comes out of tonight, frankly, is the discussion has started and we can all speak to each other in a little bit more civil tone, not they believe, she believes, he believes, but more of what can we do as a community to solve that problem.
Thank you.
And I'll say one other thing. Sorry, I'll say one other thing here because I haven't heard the bell. So not being a political person myself, but just a normal average day guy that wants to make a difference until I hear that bell, I'm going to keep talking. I lived in a foreign country for 10 years, mind you. And there's the bell.
Sorry, Dave.
That's all right.
There's the bell. Question to Bruce.
Thank you. No bell yet. Okay. I can't presume to know how to best fill the needs of Latinx students or any other culture of students in our Iowa school system. In Des Moines, we have over 100 different cultures represented in our schools. What I would do, and what I would propose to do, is form a commission made up of Latinx people, of Bosnians, of various cultures, along with teachers and ISEA. And with those groups and community leaders, come up with what will best serve the needs of our culturally diverse students. We in the Iowa House, even if the Democrats win, aren't the most culturally diverse body in the state of Iowa by any means. And I think to say that we've got all the answers to solve some of these problems that these students have would be naive. Therefore, I would propose to form a quote unquote blue ribbon commission to look into it, how better serve the needs of our culturally diverse students. And then when they give their report to the legislature, make sure that we follow that and take that report seriously and make those changes based on what our experts, our teachers say, our community leaders say, our students say, and make sure what we do is best for them.
Thank you. Question to Jennifer.
Yeah, I agree that we should be making sure that we're listening to teachers, we're listening to families. I think that's a really important component of this, that we don't force programs on communities, but that we work together with communities to make sure that what we're offering is the best, but also making sure that we're providing structure and programming for them so that they feel welcome and as part of our community. Bruce mentioned Des Moines Public Schools. West Des Moines Public Schools also has a large and culturally diverse population. So making sure people feel welcome is critically important to me. And I know it's important to the teachers and administrators that I've worked with. I think that we need to look at early childhood opportunities for Latinx students. We need to make sure that they're having that entry into the school system, being as ready and prepared and comfortable as possible. So that includes making sure that they're in early on in the process. And it also includes making sure that we have translators available for families so that kids aren't always the ones doing that translation, but that they feel that they're being heard and that you can make those connections in the classroom and in the administration. So when you go to register for classes, making sure that there's someone there who can speak your language and answer your questions so that a 5-year-old doesn't have to translate for you, right? Making sure that they feel welcome in the community. And then making sure that we hire more people to represent this community in our schools, right? So we need to have more Latinx teachers and administrators and coaches, and from all different parts of student connection. We need to make sure that people can look and kids can look up and see themselves in those important positions. There's huge power in representation, as everyone on this call knows. And I do think that programs like Gear Up, which is a program that helps with the college preparation process. So we start with early childhood, we go all the way through college prep, and making sure that programs like Gear Up get funded more so that they can help with the college prep process for first gen and for students of color and Latinx community students as well, to make sure that they're prepared for that college process. And then finally, I think we need a lot more funding for ELL programs in our schools.
Thank you. Question to Heather.
Thank you. At the risk of repeating what everybody's already said, I'll just echo a few things that I think are really important. The ELL funding is critical. So I serve on the education committee, and I'm particularly passionate, I think I already mentioned, about funding. I served on the interim committee for the school funding formula review, which happens every 5 years. I know that when most people hear school funding formula review, their eyes glaze over. I don't blame them. School funding is ridiculously complicated. But there has been a push for the last several years by some members to try to get ELL funding increased, right? To have the weighting increased. Getting consensus on that has proved to be really tough. And I've been fighting for it since I first ran for the House in 2016 and campaigned again on it in 2018. And I'm glad we finally had a bill this session that was making its way through the education committee. I served on the subcommittee for that bill to increase the weighting for ELL. It made it through education and it was making its way through APROPS. And then, like everything else we say for 2020, then COVID happened. And unfortunately, it got stymied and it didn't keep making its way through. I plan to do everything I possibly can, assuming I'm back in the legislature in January, to make sure that that bill makes it all the way through the House floor and gets passed in the Senate as well and signed by the governor. It's critically important. And then specifically to Latinx students that we were saying, I want to mention something. I guess I just want to highlight what Bruce said too. I also would not presume to have the answers on this here. And so I think it is critically important that we are listening and learning. And I would really love to hear from more folks in the Latinx community about what they feel is missing from their school districts, how they're either not being heard or just having a hard time, how we can better help them. And I think it's important that we're empowering our local schools, our local school districts, and the school boards themselves to do more for their communities, whether that's hiring diversity and equity directors to help with Latinx students and people of color as a whole, getting more representation, as Jennifer said, of teachers. That all of that will make a difference, but we really need to hear directly from those whose voices feel like they're not being heard, and just maybe in some cases definitely aren't being heard.
Thank you. We'll now go to question number 4. This will start with Dave. Where do you stand on the call to defund police departments and reallocate those resources? Dave.
That's great. I think this was my shortest answer when I sent the questionnaire back. I actually do not support defunding the police departments and reallocating the resources. I do believe that we have issues with some police departments and more specifically with some police people. I think that to say that all police should be defunded and we should put it towards mental health or put it towards, this, that, or the other, I think would do a huge disservice. Just like teachers, I actually view police people and teachers as two of the critical linchpins in society. But I would go back to what I said, that for police to be effective, they have to live in the communities that they're policing. I think that is just common sense. And I'm going to do the politician thing here too, and go back to the last question that was asked. I wanted to say, because I think it's important to understand where I'm coming from. I lived 10 years in a society where I was the minority, both in terms of nationality and color. I can tell you the best way that I fit in with that society in the Cayman Islands was to understand where people were coming from. Once I did that, the welcoming arms that occurred were unbelievable. I could have probably been laying on the street and I would guarantee you that someone would have picked me up and not just left me there. And I think that goes back to this question about defunding the police. I don't support defunding the police. I think I've got cousins that are police officers that frankly, they've got kids and wives that they've had to move because they have been harassed. That should not be acceptable in a society that we have a rule of law. That is just not acceptable. And so I do believe, though, in ensuring that our police live in the communities that they represent, because I think that would give a whole mind shift to making sure that the bad police officers are rooted out and the good ones do good policing. No racial profiling. You know, Bruce had said 3 times more likely to get searched. None of that silliness, if you will, that would occur if you don't live in that community. So don't support defunding the police or reallocating those resources. I do support in community-based policing, meaning that those police officers live in that community. And I think we can solve a lot of our issues. And I would say that would be the first step. We can always take additional steps. Once you move one way, you can't always move back the other way. So I think we need to take the simple steps first.
Thank you. Question to Bruce.
Thank you. Defunding the police department is one of those terms that just drives me absolutely crazy. I think the term itself is probably the worst term that somebody came up with. The term defunding the police, I think, causes more problems than will ever be solved. That being said, I am all in favor of reallocating some of the duties and some of the resources that our current police department now has. For example, I would be very much in favor of establishing mental health experts to go and be the first point of contact instead of the police department. I think if we would have done that in the past, there's a couple of people that would be alive right now. I think we also need to make sure through outside agencies, through those community supervisions that I had talked about with racial profiling, to oversee the police departments, to make sure that they're doing what they should be doing, to make sure that systematic racism is weeded out of the police department, to make sure that when you see somebody walking into their car, they don't get shot in the back 7 times. We need to do a complete reorganization of the police department. And that does not involve totally defunding the police. That involves reallocating their duties, making sure that true professionals are handling duties that the police are unfairly having to take care of now, and to make sure that that the police department as a whole is looking out for the best interests of the citizens of this state and of this city, no matter what their color or circumstances are.
Thank you. Question to Jennifer.
Well, look, we all knew this one was coming, right? That I took the time to look at the role that police play in our society and what our funding of that police department says about our role and where accountability lies. So what I believe is the most effective way to do this more quickly and to make true action happen is to reallocate resources within police departments so that we're hiring more social workers, we're hiring more community partners, we're hiring folks within police departments who have roles that are not just law enforcement, and using that as a bridge to the community, having those people be more in the community and using their resources that way. Additionally, I would say that we need to have some more accountability for our police departments. You know, if that involves having, an increased oversight, if it, really looking into and asking the hard questions about what our law enforcement have been doing across the country for the past several decades. I think it's time to stop and look and see how resources are allocated within police departments and what message we're sending with that allocation.
Thank you. Question to Heather.
Thanks for that. So I think that public safety is an incredibly important function for all levels of government. And so I also have concerns with using the terms defunding the police. I don't know that it's particularly helpful, but I think that we can all agree, or at least I hope we can, it should be a common goal that all police departments are focused on community policing, and that all police departments need to be working on changing their culture to make sure that all Iowans are treated fairly and with respect. I think that should be our basic, building block there. And I think it's also important to note that communities are different and that we need to be wary of like one size fits all approaches in general. I think it's also fair to say that police departments probably don't need military equipment too, right? So there's a lot to think about there. But I think it's also really clear that a lack of mental health services and access and funding have very clearly put police officers and law enforcement as a whole into a position that they should not be in. And so it's really important, I think, for the state to be working with local and county governments on ways to ensure options exist for mental health providers to perhaps be dispatched instead of your typical police officer. I think we need more de-escalation training for our police officers. But I think it's also important to remember that this has to be about more than police departments. Our state government and state agencies have been systematically underfunded for the last decade. And that means departments like DHS are being underfunded. And mental health as a whole is being underfunded. So we have to be addressing all of those things too, not just police departments, although that is also important. And I think when it comes to the broader state agency kind of stuff, it's also making sure that folks are getting the help that they need before it gets to any kind of escalated police kind of effort.
Thank you. Question to Aaron.
It'd be hard to find a majority of people that don't recognize the difficulty of our law enforcement's jobs, the things they're going into, the day-to-day things they're required to do. But at the same time, it is important that we as a society, as a governing body, as a community, ask ourselves and ask our officers serving, what is it that we're asking you to do? What is the jobs that we're asking you to do, protect and serve? What does it mean to protect and serve? And what are the tools, training, and resources you need to do that job? And then if there's something that a state or local program or service can do better than what our officers are doing, then can take a load off of them and have more expertise in that field, if it's mental health or if it's some sort of dispute, then I think there is an opportunity to allocate resources to that service, to that organization, to help them serve the community. Our officers do a lot. They're asked to do a lot. If there's an opportunity for them to share that job, that burden of keeping our community safe and help supporting the people in our communities, then we need to definitely make that happen. We've been blessed as a state to have community leaders that want to engage in this conversation. It's something we need to continue to engage in, and people that want to support our officers, and we have officers that want to support our community, good ones. So I would like to imagine that they're open to having that discussion of, what are we being asked to do, and what resources or things can be better sourced to someone else, or how can we be helped? And do we have too much on our plate? Do we need all this tools and weapons and devices for these neighborhood, this simple neighborhood dispute and things like that? So it's definitely, I see there's plenty of opportunity to have that discussion, to review what we're asking to do, and to see where we can take the load off of them.
Thank you. We're now going to go to our questions submitted from the chat or from other audience members. And we're actually going to continue with the topic of policing. It's been in the news so much and on top of all of our minds lately. So let's just go a little bit further with this one. This will start with Bruce, and it is as follows. Many people in our communities feel that police are not accountable to them. Do you feel there needs to be ways to make sure this accountability happens, like citizen review boards? Question to Bruce.
Oh, absolutely. As I've said a couple of times, I think we absolutely need community review boards. And not only review boards, but we need community boards that will help establish what the rules of engagement are. What needs to be done as far as racial profiling goes, when police should be engaged, and when, say, mental health professionals should be engaged. And they should be the ones to, I think, establish when those rules are broken and what those penalties are for breaking those rules. I think we have too much of a culture within our police department. And it's good for when they're on the road of, I've got your back type thing. But I think it's carried a little bit too far when it comes to administrative. Did you do the right thing? Should you have pulled your weapon out and shot at the time? I think we've got too much of the police saying, oh, I got your back on those issues also. And I think an independent citizen review board would go a long ways to not only make sure that justice is carried out, but to give more of a sense that things are equal within the community.
Thank you. Question to Jennifer.
Sorry. Yeah, I do believe that we need to have citizen review boards. That was the initial question, right? I'm making sure that I'm answering the right one. I do believe that we do, but I think that we need to make sure that those review boards are chosen, including and with the involvement of community members, that they're not just those of us who are at the Capitol shifting around people we know who need to get on boards and commissions, making sure that the community players are involved as well in the development of those boards, because the last thing we need is citizen boards that are filled with a bunch of yes people who don't truly represent the community, but then are used as a scapegoat. Well, no, see, we asked the community. That's what I want to make sure we avoid here. So I think they need to be community based.
Thank you. Question to Heather.
I would hope that it goes without saying that anyone in public service needs to be held to a standard of transparency and accountability. Whether it is, those of us who serve in the legislature and, having conversations with our constituents and being, really open about what it is that we're doing and all of that. And I think that goes to all levels of government, and it goes to all levels of service. And public service includes, obviously, our police departments. And it sounds like, to me at least, that community review boards are things that make sense. And I really appreciated Jennifer's comment there too about making sure that it's folks in the community that are really involved in making decisions about who is a part of it, because yeah, local folks in the community know it best, and we absolutely don't want yes people just making these decisions.
Thank you. Question to Aaron.
Just to slightly piggyback off of Heather, we all have, everyone on this forum has someone they report to. For me as a teacher, I have administrators who walk through my classroom while I'm teaching, while I'm working, to see how I'm doing, to give me tips, to give me ideas, to let me know things I've missed or done wrong. And putting a badge on a uniform is extreme amount of power that we're giving these people to protect and serve us. So having a review board full of community leaders would be a great step. Body cameras that help document, continuing to push that across our state and make sure that they have it as a standard practice is something that can help protect the community as well as officers themselves. If there's a dispute that goes against what actually happened towards an officer, they would have the video evidence to back them up, as well as citizens they're serving. If they're being abused or things like that, it's thank goodness cell phones, it's one of the positives of cell phone technology and cameras have caught so many of these instances. There's so much more that goes unseen, but I've caught some of these instances because we get to have these conversations at the forefront now. So it's what's the next step? And I think having someone, making sure that we are holding our defenders accountable for their actions, or that we are reminding them that we're watching. It's not a fox guarding a hen house situation. We gotta make sure that we protect ourselves as a society, that we protect the good officers, and that we keep an eye out for the bad ones.
Thank you. Question to Dave.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a good discussion. It sounds like everybody can have civil conversations, and oftentimes we're in a lot of agreements, although there might be some nuances. One, yes, absolutely, citizen review boards, as long as, and I think it was Heather said this, they are community-based, so you can understand the needs of that community. And as Aaron just stated, body cameras, absolutely, because I think body cameras do not lie one way or the other. And I think if you put those two together, there should be little question that what police do right or what they've done wrong. Aaron had said that he's a teacher, so he's got a boss. Here, I was a civil servant for nearly a decade, and I think every civil servant does it because they have a desire to do well within society and help society. They're certainly not doing it for the money or the power or the prestige. And I actually think most police officers are not doing it for the power, despite what the badge might represent. They're doing it because they want to help the community. But that being said, as a civil servant, I knew I was accountable to only one person, and that was the public. What I did, what I taught, what I said, every word I said, I was accountable to the public of how that turned out. And I've never been ashamed of that, because that is something that I think all civil servants take with a huge responsibility, knowing that what they say, how they act publicly, privately, actually shows a lot of who they are. So yes, body cameras, the review boards that are community-based, I think would solve a lot of the issues, frankly, that we've seen. And I would add that even with the body cameras, even with cell phones, we still have debates. Oh, that video was doctored. That video wasn't doctored. This is why the review boards are necessary. Body cameras can only go so far in convincing the public that the police have done a good job. So if you have community-based review boards, they can kind of be the mediator, if you will, between what really happened and what people think happened.
Thank you. Next question came in through the chat. There actually are multiple. Hopefully we'll get to all of them. It's been over an hour and we haven't yet once even mentioned the coronavirus. So now it's time to change that. Black and Latinx folks are disproportionately represented in the essential workforce and consequently have been overexposed to the coronavirus. Yet leaders in the state and nation ignore the negative community impact that affects the lives of so many. How would you have approached worker protection in the state to ensure all were protected? And what will you do moving forward to ensure that Black and Latinx folks and workers will be safe in the future? And this one will start with Jennifer.
Yep, obviously it's an important issue and one that's been very overlooked. And I think it starts fundamentally, everybody could look back and say, what would you do in this situation? And there are several times that I've said, I don't know how I could have handled it differently at the leadership level, but there are several ways that I do think that I would have handled it differently. And one of those involves the rush to return and reopen with regard to the representation of Black and Latinx individuals in the essential workforce. So, the more quickly we opened up restaurants, the more quickly we opened up these businesses. While I feel for these businesses, and I believe that we as a government need to do a better job of taking care of them during this crisis. But essentially trying to reopen too quickly and getting back to regular life so quickly did expose a lot of essential workers, a lot of people who are disproportionately represented in that workforce, which includes Black and Latinx Americans and Iowans. I think that we got there too fast, and I think that put them in harm's way. Additionally, I would not have supported, and I did not support, any legislation that gave workforces immunity from any sort of civil action or criminal action liability with regard to if someone caught coronavirus on the job. I believe that we need to make sure that people are held accountable, that companies are held accountable. And when you're looking at meatpacking plants that have people being forced to go back to work because we don't have the social systems in place to help them, because we've required that they go back to work because we're pretending that everything is fine. And when they don't have an option, they don't have anywhere else to go in a community because of documentation status or other reasons, forcing people to go back to places like workplace or meatpacking plants, and then protecting those companies from taking care of those employees is really part of a big systemic problem that really shows how little we value certain lives in this state, and that is unacceptable. And so I would have fought to keep companies more accountable. I would have tried to find funding so that people could stay home rather than going out into the workforce. And I would have not reopened as quickly so that we could protect those essential workers who are facing it more directly.
Thank you. Question to Heather.
Thanks. This is, as Jennifer said, a really important question, a really important topic, and one that we had a lot to think about in the last couple of weeks after we went back to session, after it was suspended. There is so much here. I want to echo basically everything that Jennifer said, and I want to just add on a couple of pieces with that. OSHA, right? When we talk about everything that was happening with the meatpacking plants, there were way too many folks in our state that were trying to make it harder for OSHA to come in and actually make sure that workplace safety was in place. And that's just, to me, is unconscionable, right? Like, any business should care about their workers, and the state should care about every single resident, and making sure that they have a safe place to work is critically important. And I feel like there are folks in this state that really let workers down when they fought back against OSHA and also on that liability bill. Because let's be honest, there are some small businesses that really need some kind of protection, right? If they're doing the right thing, if they're following CDC guidelines, if they are doing their level best to make sure that their workers are safe, then we don't want to go after them, right? If something happens. But this bill that passed instead went so far beyond that it is practically impossible for an individual who has been hurt by COVID to actually fight back against those bad actor companies. And so that's an important caveat, right? To talk about the fact that there are businesses that are doing the right thing, and we want to make sure they are protected, but we do not want to let bad actors just get off scot-free, essentially.
Okay, that is time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Aaron, question to you.
When one of my students aren't feeling well, they're sick, they got the flu, they got who knows what kind of germs, the parents keep them home. They keep them home, they monitor them, they take care of them, and then they send them back when they know they're fully ready to be back. They don't keep them out the rest of the year. If they look completely healthy, they take care of their kids. So when we look at these factories full of people, we need to remember that these are people working here, people who have families, people who have needs working here. We need to make sure we're keeping people first. There's opportunities, whether it comes up again, happens again, moving forward, opportunities where we can still support business and entities, but we can take time away, shut down facilities for a period of time to make sure that protections are in place, to make sure that if and when people go back, they're gonna have a healthy environment to be in, that they're gonna be completely have the opportunities to work, to take care of their families. So I have a similar lens to some of the comments said already. I'll say with a lot of the missed opportunities to move our state forward during this pandemic in a way that has caution and keeps it people first. So, we got to make sure that we're electing leaders at every level that is being mindful of the person first. We want a strong economy. We want education. But at the same time, if we just throw everyone into the fire, then they'll all come out burned. And we saw it. We all should have see it coming. So we got to remember that we want our companies in our state to succeed, But if our workers that go into those places are not healthy or not whole or dying, then we're failing the people who are electing us to be their leaders. So keeping people first, no matter what the legislation is like, does this serve people? It should be on any elected person's mind at all levels of state government.
Thank you. Question to Dave.
Yeah, I mean, hindsight's always 20/20, right? I think the first thing with the whole COVID situation is, honestly, we just messed it up. All the way from state to the federal, we just messed it up. We should start with the simple things, and we could have, which would, everybody has to wear a mask, which I know is unpopular. My kids hate it. Every day I hear it, but it would have helped some of these essential workers from being exposed. So we wouldn't end up having to backpedal and try to make people whole. And so, you know what? With people that have died, you're never going to make that family whole. So I think I would have started with masks. I think I would piggyback off what Aaron just said. You know what? All the workman's comp when we shut down the economy, if that had been given to somebody who was just sick, maybe from the meatpacking plant, seems like that would have been a little bit better, well spent. You know, stay home for 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, whatever it is, if you test positive, and we'll pay you your full salary. I bet there's enough money that could have covered that person or those people. And then as far as being overexposed, I think it's an unfortunate thing that they're overexposed because we didn't do those first two things, you know, the masks, and we didn't, frankly, and we still don't do enough testing. As I said, I've got 2 boys that go to school every single day in person, and I worry every single day. But I know there's calculated risks, and they wear those masks every single day. And then I think finally, as far as businesses being liable, I think if there is blatant violations of OSHA rules, absolutely hold them liable. But as blaming them because someone catches COVID, boy, that's going to be pretty hard to prove. Did that person catch COVID there, or did they not wear a mask at Menards or Home Depot? You know, if you want to go after the businesses, you're going to shut the businesses down, and you're not going to have a business for people to go to work at. So I would err more on the side of let's do the simple things to make sure that everybody is always safe the next time, which could very well be in a month from now once we get cold here in Iowa. And making sure that we're doing the testing to make sure that we know who is carrying this. And I think we would have solved a lot of the problems from the very beginning, frankly, instead of ending up as one of the latest, in the last couple of weeks, at least, hotspot states. That's not acceptable for Iowans. I don't find that acceptable, and I don't think anybody in Iowa finds that acceptable.
Thank you. Going on to our next question, which I'm dropping into chat right now, except to everybody, not just to one person. Let me try that again. And voila. This one will start with Heather, and it's on mental health. Mental health services are not often accessible to people with the highest levels of stress, insecurity, and lack of control over their lives because they don't have access to insurance-based comprehensive mental health coverage, such as from an employer provided. Because of cuts at our state level to mental health programs, our local law enforcement agencies have been forced to deal with mental health crises in our communities, as many have noted on this call already. What state level programs and funding do you support to make sure the most vulnerable among us have access to these quality services? And that starts with Heather.
Well, thank you for this question, because quite frankly, mental health is one of our biggest human services challenges in this state, and I mean, honestly, in the country, if we're really being honest. And there are so many facets to this that hopefully I don't run out of time when trying to talk about it. But there are a couple pieces. You know, Iowa has structures in place for adult and children's mental health systems, but the funding is not there for it. In 2 different ways. I mean, the children's system, which is new, just fundamentally does not have the funding attached to it, or at least not in any kind of way that is enough. And then the adult system is just hampered by the way it's set up in our property tax system, where counties are limited in what they can actually levy to raise for mental health services. So I think it's really important that we actually have a dedicated funding stream for mental health. And that we need to fix how funding is done. So we need to look at what our options are. There's the possibility of allowing counties to raise the levy is one way of looking at it. That would certainly make a difference in Polk County. There's the option of having it be a general fund appropriation, but it would need to be constitutionally protected because otherwise it could just go up and down every year. And I think the other part of mental health that is talked about by some, but not enough, is that it goes more than just to straight up funding, is that we do not have enough providers in this state, particularly ones that can prescribe medications. So it is incredibly difficult for those who need care to literally find it. Like there aren't enough providers. So we do need more of an emphasis in the state of getting even more residency programs. We do have a relatively new one at Broadlawns that is helpful, but that's graduating 4 people a year, and it takes 4 years to get through a residency program. So that's one piece.
That is our time for that question. It's just 2 minutes for this section, sorry. This goes on to Aaron, same question.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't speak with the same authority and the study that Heather has, but I've talked with many constituents, many residents of this district who have struggles, mental health struggles, or they know someone, or they have kids who have struggles with mental health, and they don't know who to turn to. They don't have the financial means or the services available for them to get the help they need. So as legislators, and if I'm blessed to join on Capitol Hill, it's our jobs to look at the bills that come across, the funding budget that comes across, and think, does this help everyday Iowans? Does this help the people we serve, the people that are looking to us to lead? How can we serve all of them, not just the ones that we agree with? And how can we make their lives better? And a lot of that, it can be done through, it's as I mentioned before, with education, it's going to take some sort of investment. It's going to take looking at budgets and looking at, do we really need this program, or does this State Department need a fleet of new vehicles, when we have families that can't buy a new vehicle until every 12 years if they're lucky, and we have departments that might get new vehicles, shiny new vehicles every 4 years. There are those opportunities that can be found, and can we figure out how to better serve everyday Iowans with when it comes to funding programs that is needed across our state. And I've seen it in our schools as well, where we have students who struggle and students who need that help. And we need leaders who are going to work to serve these people and to work diligently and make difficult decisions and not just talk a good game.
Thank you. Question to Dave.
Yeah, I think mental health, and it goes back to somewhat of the policing answer, is a very large issue. I have a sister-in-law that is actually a mental health counselor, and she was at Mercy, and now she's doing her own practice. She also happens to be Latina. So I think that we have to provide mental health services. And frankly, this goes to a lot of health care services, just generally, not just mental health. But I do think that there's a lot of funds that exist within Iowa to do that, but we just have to move them and allocate them to the most appropriate places. Continuing to either tax or at some assessment on is only going to go so far. And you can only do that so long, frankly. But I think you need to have easily accessible mental health services. And like I said, my sister-in-law being a counselor, I have kind of firsthand view of that. She's overloaded, and she just started about 1.5 years ago. But sometimes the insurance companies don't play nice. And I would like to see everybody that participates in any healthcare services, whether it be mental health or a hospital visit, pay on some sort of sliding scale. I think we all would agree that if you have a little bit of skin in the game, you're more likely to appreciate that opportunity. And I think that goes for mental health as well. I think it was Kim Reynolds also just gave $50 million to mental health back in June. So it seems like there's a lot of money there. We just have to look at the data and see where it's actually going.
Thank you. The next one will go to Bruce. And Bruce, this question on mental health is for you. And also I want to double back for you to the COVID question since I inadvertently skipped you. So you will have 4 minutes to answer both those.
Oh, that's okay. It's not a problem. On the COVID question, the first thing that I would have done something that the governor of this state didn't do, and that's actually have a plan. Governor Reynolds appeared to have a plan that Iowans and Iowa companies will do the right thing. That's basically all we ever heard. And as we've seen, Iowa companies, and Iowans for that matter, don't always do the right thing. So I would have developed a plan early, using our medical resources that we have and our medical advisors, and put up a plan, especially with our meat packing plants and our essential businesses, to deal with social distancing, with making sure that workers are protected, not only with face masks, but by shields around their workplaces. And I would have also made sure that OSHA did have enough teeth to be able to go in and make sure that these businesses were playing by the rules that we set up. Unfortunately, those rules weren't set up. We left it up to the companies to set up those rules. And we didn't give OSHA enough teeth to make sure that those rules were covered, even the rules that were established by the companies. Pandemics are going to happen again in this state, in this country. So one of the things that I've already started and will continue, especially after the election's over with, is to get with meatpacking workers, to get with the unions that oversee those workers, and to get with our medical advisors to establish those rules that we should have to deal with the current pandemic and for the next pandemic. And then also give Iowa OSHA workers the teeth to go in and enforce those rules. Now, as far as mental health goes, I will tell you right up front that I am absolutely no expert on mental health. What I will tell you, I had a constituent about a year and a half ago that I talked to, that his daughter was having serious mental health issues. And he was on a 6-month waiting list to get help for his daughter. He spent 6 agonizing, dreadful months where he had to go as far as take the door off the bathroom because he was afraid his daughter was going to go in there, lock the door, and commit suicide. We have to deal with that. We have to make sure that those parents and those kids are covered by a mental health system. We in the state of Iowa have developed at least a good start for a mental health system in the state. What we haven't done is funded it. So we absolutely need to put our money where our mouth is and to fund the mental health system that we've developed through the state over the last couple of years, and make sure that everybody that needs mental health help can get it.
Thank you. Quick check-in. I want to keep the moderator honest. Jennifer, did you answer the mental health question yet? Or we still have to come
No.
to you? Okay,
Nope.
Go ahead.
Nope. Okay. Well, I won't keep us too long, but I agree with a lot of what's been said, particularly with regard to funding. I do want to tell you that I was on the board of Des Moines Pastoral Counseling Center for a while, and I got to see the impact of a sliding scale, as Dave mentioned. And I do think that's a good model to allow people to have the opportunity to, it's not all or nothing with regard to funding. You either have insurance or you can't go. And so I do like that model, but that requires resources. That requires for someone else to carry the load. And I will tell you that in Iowa, reimbursement rates, as I know that Heather probably was about to say, reimbursement rates for mental health are abysmal. And therefore we have people in states around us who are deciding to practice elsewhere because they can't get the same reimbursement rates here. And so in addition to funding, I also want to say that I think that telehealth parity needs to be really important, and that we need to cover telehealth, mental health programs at 100% reimbursement, because I'm a professor. I have students who get sick. I have students who have mental health crises, who have trouble getting in to see a psychiatrist during a normal time. Now it's even worse if they don't have the access to telehealth, because if people are sick, we're getting our providers sick. We're also putting people at risk. So we need to push our insurance companies to have telehealth equity as well.
Thank you. We're now going to another question submitted, and this will start with Aaron. This is going a little bit broader now. How do you show up for racial justice? What steps are you personally taking to dismantle systemic racism in our community or will take? And just any thoughts on reparations and that discussion? And starting with Aaron, go ahead.
This is a 2-minute question?
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah, no worries. Being there for the community. That's what being leaders is all about. I said I've been elected to the West Des Moines Parks Board twice, and that's because I go out and I have conversations and I engage with people. When the Black Lives Matter movement started popping up across the metro, across the state, across the nation, I showed up when I could to downtown when the people were getting together to voice their frustrations, to Railroad Park here in West Des Moines when a group got together to have those conversations, to have that representation and to voice their frustrations, and the local leaders that came out to support them as well. And just being there to hear them, to understand their frustrations and what they're going through. And that's what it should be for every situation, every issue, every policy. It's like, you don't have to agree. And I do agree with this movement, but you don't have to agree, but you need to understand why it's happening. You need to understand the anger, the sadness, and the pain, or the struggles and the challenges that go on, so that you can better find a way to work with the people you're trying to lead and serve. And beyond that, I'm trying to have those conversations, trying to make sure that I'm being authentically me as a leader and trying to represent all people and not just bullet points or not just something because a party agenda told me I was supposed to represent it. So making sure I'm being true to myself and being true to the diversity of our population and individualism. And, if I'm blessed enough to get in the Capitol, helping pass legislation with whoever's trying to work towards those same goals that will help provide equal opportunity for everyone.
Thank you. Question to Dave.
I live this every day. I don't know if I shared this. I have 2 kids that are biracial. So every day we have discussions. The great thing is that they've spent the first 7 or so of their years in a society that didn't look at race. And that was the Cayman Islands. Nationality, yes, but race, no. And those two are distinctly separate. And every day we talk about it because my boys don't understand. They want to, they watch the latest TikTok video or YouTube video and they're like, oh, did you see this? This is awful. And we have discussions, deep discussions about it. And I hope someday that I can be a proud dad and have them bridge that divide where they don't have to take a side. I don't want them to take a side. I want them to take the American, the Iowan side, not the black, not the white side, not the Caymanian side. I want them to take, them for who they are. The funny thing is, if you speak with kids actually, and I've asked my boys this directly, so do you feel any different at school? No. Why? Why should I? Do you feel like you're picked on? No. Do you feel like, you being, not 100% white makes a big deal? No. Well, what most people think of you? I don't know. Kids don't think about these things. These are issues that we make as adults that we need to address, but we also need to make sure that our kids are growing up in a society where we don't make it their issues just because it's our issue. Yes, we need to fix it, but our kids see a lot more than what we give them credit for, and I hope someday they can bridge that divide. So I live that every day with them, and probably more so than I even know when I'm walking in the community with them. As far as reparations, I'm not a believer that will actually solve anything. It might make us feel good for a while, but if we don't have the discussions, it's nothing else is going to matter. So I believe that what you're doing here tonight, having the discussions with all of the different groups of people and backgrounds that we have, actually makes for the best starting point, so that we can actually move forward as a society and we can get things on a level playing field. It may never be equal, but it can be fair.
Thank you. That goes now to Bruce.
Thank you. And I'll piggyback off what's been said currently. We've got to start with having a conversation. Tonight's been good, but unfortunately, we've done all the talking. We as candidates have done all the talking, and it's kind of the unfortunate part of these types of Zoom forums that we don't get a chance to listen. And that's one of the things that we've got to do is to start listening more. Not just saying what we're going to do, but listening to what needs to be done. I think through having that conversation, that back and forth conversation, we can go a long ways to, and I'm not going to say understand the problem, because I think from our vantage point, we may not understand the problem, but we need to empathize with the problem. And once we do that, then we've got to take the next step and be a leader, the leaders that we want to be, the leaders that we're running for office for, and enact legislation to try to, if not solve the problem, at least relieve some of that problem. Whether that be with, as we talked about before, decriminalizing marijuana, doing something about racial profiling, doing something about education. We got to take those steps to lead, to make sure that problems of the past and problems of the present aren't going to be problems of the future. As far as reparations go, I think it's a subject worth talking about. It's not a new subject for the United States. We gave reparations to the Japanese when during the internments. We've done reparations for Italian groups. With Blacks, we have a long history of having to atone for some of our actions, whether it be slavery, whether it be
That's time, unfortunately. Sorry, that's time. Maybe this question has too much in it. Jennifer, question to you.
What am I doing to stand up for racial justice? Well, to Bruce's point, I'm listening. I'm trying to listen and also question a lot of my own prejudices and the things that I bring to the table and what I presume and what I need to learn more about. I've done a lot of reading, I've done a lot of reflecting, and I've taken some coursework as part of my role as a leader at Drake with regard to helping students of color feel more welcome on campus and stick around. And I've learned a lot, and I've had to hear things I don't like to hear. I've had to recognize things I don't want to recognize, but I think that's part of the important personal work that I've had to do to become a better anti-racist and to do more to address these issues. I will say that I was proud to be on the steering committee that developed the More Perfect Union plan that was then passed by the legislature unanimously. It's a good start. We're off to a good start there. We as a state need to not look at that as sort of a benchmark to now move on, but as a starting point. And then, so I'm doing all I can as a person to try to stand up for racial justice, and then also as a leader, both on campus and at the legislature. And then with regard to reparations, my solution to reparations is to look at baby bonds instead. And it's not just because I'm a huge Cory Booker fan, but also because I think baby bonds are a really good way to address intergenerational wealth inequity, and to make sure that people, when you give savings bonds and you give money to babies when they're born, and then you allow that to grow and accrue, you try to even that inequity gap a little bit with regards to intergenerational wealth. And I think that's a starting point that's perhaps a little more realistic. I do think that we as a society need to pay for what we've done to African Americans and to Blacks in this country. But I think if we want to get something done a little more quickly, baby bonds might be a way to address that issue.
Thank you. Question to Heather.
Thank you. So there are a couple things. I want to echo what Jennifer said about doing a lot of the personal reflecting and reading and having conversations and really listening. I think what I've definitely tried to do that, and continue to do that. I think another piece is constantly working on making sure that, and I think this is true for a lot of us, right, that we are not the voices that are front and center, right? Or we are not the faces that are front and center. It is making sure that whether it's our colleagues who are people of color or other folks in the community, making sure that we are lifting up their voices and they are leading and we are learning by their example. I think that's something that I've really tried to focus on. I think it's also, for me, it's certainly stepping back and sitting in my own discomfort every once in a while and taking more time to think about why I may be responding to something in a certain way and reflecting on my own privileges because of that. When it comes to reparations, I think it's really important for us to focus on maybe not so much the actual terminology around reparations, but just actually on policies that actually provide economic opportunities for folks. And It probably will not come as a surprise for those of you who know Jennifer and I, that we both endorsed Cory Booker. And so of course she talked about baby bonds. And of course I was gonna talk about baby bonds because it is such a really great policy piece. So I will not belabor that point, but it is important to note, that there is a huge wealth gap between people of color, specifically Black families, and white families that has to be addressed. And there are so many structural issues that we need to focus on. But I think we also need to be talking about, and I mentioned in my intro, that my focus is
That is time.
an opportunity.
Thank you. And for our last question of the night, will kind of be a sum up. We'll start with Dave. Some of the candidates have mentioned wanting to hear from the Latinx community or Black community on what they need. What are you already doing to reach out and understand these communities, whether it be students, parents, and any other constituents? And this question starts with Dave. 2 minutes.
Sure. So as I mentioned, and if anybody was listening, I have a sister-in-law that is Latina. So I speak with her quite a bit. I have 2 kids that are biracial that live with me. And so I speak with them quite a bit, which obviously they're not of voting age. And then I also speak to other different communities within the Waukee school system. I sat on the Waukee Schools Foundation for quite a while, up until about 1.5 years ago. And Waukee is quite diverse. It may not have the raw numbers, but we've got Indians, we've got Latinos, we've got biracial kids. We have a lot going on here. Again, raw numbers wise, compared to like where my niece goes and Des Moines Public Schools over by Hoover. Yeah, no, not raw numbers. But I think family is usually pretty honest with you. So I've done a lot of speaking with them. And then also just speaking with my kids' parents to find out what their thoughts are. Where are we going wrong? What can we do better? I would like to listen a lot more than I do, to be honest. I wish I had all the time. I think Bruce pointed this out, that we spend a lot of time talking as politicians, and some politicians get really good at that, and they spend a lot less time listening. And so I think that's what the best thing is that's come out of this tonight, is it allows us all to listen to each other and hopefully realize we're a lot more similar than different. But I would like to do a lot more listening, to be honest. Like I said, I feel like I got a pretty good handle on it, especially having lived in a society where I was the minority, so I can empathize. But I think we all need to do better at listening every day.
Thank you. Question to Bruce.
Yeah. If the question is who are we listening to and who are we talking to, I've spent quite a lot of time the past couple months talking with Mary Campos and Joe Henry with the Latino groups, and then with Betty Andrews with the Iowa Nebraska NAACP, and also Chaos Abdul Samad, who's a African American legislator and a Muslim, and my twin brother. I think, as I said before, and has been mentioned, we've got to listen more. If we do some listening and then act upon that listening, act upon that information that we receive, we can go a long ways to make Iowa a better place for everybody to live in. Iowa has a great history of dealing with civil rights. We were one of the first states to grant gay marriages. We were one of the first states to desegregate schools in the state. We throughout the ages, Iowa has been proud, and rightfully so, to be at the forefront of civil rights actions and movements. And I think we can do that again. But first, as I said, we've got to listen, and then we've got to act. If we do that, we'll be okay.
Thank you. Question to Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks. So this is a tricky question for me because I'm trying to find a balance, if I'm being completely honest, between not going to people who are living in the community and asking them, what am I supposed to do to help? Because it is not always everyone's job to teach me what needs to be done and where I need to be better, right? So I'm trying to find this line between listening to people. So I'm listening to students. I learned about DACA from a dreamer. I learned about the impact on her as a student from her. And I think it works best when it's organic like that, when she feels that she's looking to me and we can have a conversation rather than me going to people and saying, okay, teach me how I can be better at this, because I know that there's weariness about those issues too. So what I'm trying to do is listen. Students are an amazing resource. You know, students do not hesitate to tell you what they think or how they feel. And they also have some really great ideas. So I'm finding myself listening to students a lot, and also listening to community members who represent different cultures and different perspectives. It's hard though, because of this idea that I don't want to overburden people who are already so burdened by what they're facing and say, okay, now you tell me what to fix. So I'm trying to find that balance. And to be frank, I'm excited about finding more ways to find people, because I don't think I'm doing enough. And I'm probably too cautious, but I'm also hyper aware of not going to the first African-American person I see and saying, hey, so what should I do to be a better anti-racist? They're like, please stop. I'm tired of having to tell people what to do. Just you figure it out. It's you're the bad guy here. You figure it out. And that's what I'm trying to do. So I can do better, but I'm also trying to talk with as many folks as I can in a more natural, engaging, two-way conversation.
Thank you. Question to Heather.
I think it's so true that organic conversations make a huge difference. And to Jennifer's point too, like that's something that I think about all the time. Like, I don't want to be the person who's saying, teach me something, right? That's not someone else's job, right? So I try to find ways to have conversations with folks that don't feel like so much pressure on them, you know, to be teaching me. So when there are those organic opportunities, I seize upon them. And the other piece that I would mention is that there is a really fantastic group in my community. They're called Ankeny Community Network. They are a relatively new group, but they are doing phenomenal work in our community to put multiculturalism at the forefront and make sure that we as a community are actually listening to each other, engaging each other. Actually, literally right before this event, I was with them at their event at the town square in Ankeny to talk about, you know, to meet some other folks with, meet some folks with the school board and just, you know, it had kind of a school theme to it. But really, I think it's making sure that groups like this we're able to elevate their voices and, you know, to also, you know, to visit with them and to just be there with them, to support them and learn from them.
Thank you. Question to Aaron.
Yes, and I'm going to double back because I forgot to answer the reparations part, but part of my 2 minutes, 50 seconds that's left, or 1 minute, 50 seconds. Reparations would be difficult to do. It's a very, you know, all the candidates acknowledge that there's ways that we should start. But I know that from my own perspective, from people I know, something that many people want is just equal opportunity, to be treated equally, to be seen equally, to not to be seen as less, not to be seen as a different class of citizen that's not as good. And to change that perception is going to take time, but I think there's ways we can do it. I know Senator Booker and Vice Presidential candidate Kamala Harris helped introduce a bill to make Juneteenth a national holiday, federal holiday. I think that'd be an excellent step of recognizing what we did was terrible as a nation. We need to remember it. We need to move forward. We need to be better. Speaking to what am I doing to connect with Latinx families and students, I've mentioned that I've worked with students of that community. I've been on, there was a radio show, La Que Buena, a radio show that's a Latino host and everything, and they allowed me to be a guest, and I spoke through translator because my Spanish is not very good for conversation yet. But just being able to meet them where they're at, engage with them. I'm someone who doesn't mind someone asking me about my experiences, but I understand the fear of talking to someone we don't know and telling them to, you know, to tell me what's wrong in your life is a strange and not an appropriate conversation to always have. So building those relationships is something I love doing. Meeting people and just finding out, you know, what's going on in your life, finding out how I can better help them from where I'm at. And I think someone also mentioned if any of the candidates went to the SURJ meetings, I would love to go if it's something that works in my schedule. This is something that I've just become aware of. So I appreciate this opportunity tonight, especially.
Very good. Perfectly timed answer, Aaron. And we actually don't have enough time left for everyone to weigh in on another question. So that will be the last question. But I just want to take a moment to thank you guys, Jennifer, Heather, Dave, Bruce, Aaron, for your time and for joining us, and for all the audience members. Like most SURJ meetings, this one conflicted directly with a meal time. So thank you for making the sacrifice. And then if you would be so kind as to finish the questionnaire and submit it to the SURJ Gmail, we would greatly appreciate that. We plan to turn that into an infographic and then share it with our channels, just to kind of provide a follow-up for folks that couldn't make it. So once again, thank you very much. We hope that everybody here will connect with us. Amy is dropping the links in the chat window there to our Facebook group, as well as our website. We do have a bi-weekly newsletter. It's going out every other Sunday or Monday. So once again, thank you all very, very much. And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation, not the end. So have a lovely evening and best of luck in your races.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.